and welcome to another Camp Blanding Museum video on the history of Camp Blanding. I'm Dr. George Cressman, and I serve here at the museum as the museum historian. Today I'm going to be talking with you about an area just west of the post called Boomtown. Boomtown came into being as the post was mobilized for federal service, and a major construction effort started here. So recall that this is 1940. It's the end of the Depression era. Jobs are starting to increase with the accelerating war goods manufacture, but good paying jobs are still somewhat scarce. And so when Camp Blanding was mobilized for federal service, there was an immediate rush to come to this area. Major expectations of huge employment numbers and very well-paying jobs. So as Camp Blanding was mobilized for federal service and the major construction work was taken on by Starke Brothers and Eakin, employment in the area grew to roughly 22,000. Now that created some problems, and perhaps the most important one is many of these workers were migratory, and they came to Camp Blanding to find a good paying job, and they brought their families with them. But there was very little housing for families of the workers who were coming into the area. So an area just to the west of the post itself grew to be a small shanty town that was labeled Boomtown. You see a set of photographs showing a shift change at Camp Blanding. The construction work here went 3 shifts a day, 7 days a week. Pay was good, even for unskilled workers. And the work was rushed. Had to be rushed because the first troops coming in to train were expected to start arriving in late November of 1940. So massive construction work had to be done in a hurry. This attracted, of course, many workers. As I commented earlier, it peaked at 22,000, many of them coming with their families. So here in this slide, you see the beginnings of movement into the Boomtown area. This is one of my favorite slides, this photograph. This is a photograph of a family moving into the Boomtown area. They have a wagon that's being pulled by a mule, and the family's entire collection of worldly goods is piled up in that wagon. Housing became an immediate problem. In this slide, you see Boomtown as it began to expand. 2 photographs here of tents. And these were considered to be the exclusive areas for workers to live in at Camp Blanding. Housing consisted of almost anything that could be assembled, put together. Anything that you could put a sort of a roof over became a housing facility. Tents were considered the exclusive domain of the very lucky who came to Camp Blanding. And here you see in the next slide, you see a photograph of some that were not quite so lucky. This family has accumulated a collection of corrugated sheet iron. That becomes the walls of their new house. Notice the canvas roof over the top, probably leaked. And here you see a set of families moving into the post itself, or to Boomtown itself. Here are families unloading its belongings from the vehicle that they drove in. Notice the tents in the background. You know, it's hard to tell what this would house this family. Perhaps not quite as lucky as the tent folks. Perhaps another one of those corrugated metal pieces. Many of the families came in with children, and this highlights another set of problems. Many of the families coming migratory, and as a consequence, their children, it's been the Depression era, families moving from place to place trying to find a job, and a consequence of that is their children were not going to school. When they reached the Boomtown area, there was also a school problem. The closest schools were located in Middleburg, very small system, and in Starke, which is also somewhat larger, but still a small school system. But even if there was space for the children, there was a problem in getting access to the school. As you noted, as you saw in the earlier slide, there was that mule pulling the wagon, not suitable transportation for getting the kids to school in the morning. Further, for those families that were lucky enough to have a vehicle, that vehicle was often being driven to Camp Landing itself for the construction work, and therefore not available to take children to school in the morning. School buses did not exist in great quantity at that time. So many of the families continued to have their children playing during the day and not at school. The lack of schooling throughout the 1930s and the 1940s created an immense problem. In addition to the social issue of lack of schooling for children, there were also health issues in the Boomtown area. Many of the families that came in dug surface wells for water. This water is untreated, provided breeding grounds for mosquitoes, but was also untreated and therefore, in some cases, in fact, in many cases, unsanitary, not really usable, but it was being consumed anyway. There also were no sanitary facilities. So much of the area used the old outdoor privies. Sanitation in the area became a huge problem. And in early 1941, the Florida State Health Authorities came into the area and conducted a mass inoculation program to prevent typhus and cholera spreading across the Boomtown area. So what happened to Boomtown? In the first quarter of 1941, there were still some additional construction activities that stretched out through the third quarter of 1941. So there were some jobs left over, but not nearly the 22,000 that had been seen before. So much of the migratory labor left Camp Landing and moved on to find other jobs. In the meantime, a small number of concrete block apartments, we'll call them apartments, were built in the Boomtown area. There was a bar there, the Soldier's Joy, and that remained in place. A movie theater was built in the Boomtown area. In 1944, in a small laundry facility in the Boomtown area, there was a propane cylinder that exploded, caught on fire, and there was a fire that swept through the entire Boomtown area. And the facilities that were there were burned to the ground, and they were never replaced. So thank you again for joining us for this short video on the history of Boomtown. We appreciate the time you're spending with us to watch these videos, and we most hope that you'll come visit us at Camp Landing. We're open every day from noon to 4.